Okay, the Zoom should be active. Let me share my screen. Come on, try again. Did it do it that time? Okay, good. So in your textbook at the very beginning, there's all of the contents at a glance things and everything. I think that the introduction includes a part that talks about, I don't see it. Well, I'll find it for you before we get done and show you. And in the worst case, I'll set up a link to their GitHub repo. And I got the whole file available, so we'll get that to everybody. So their download of their program source is kind of like the book, where it's kind of scattered. You know, it jumps around a little bit, definitely. But at least if you download the program source, then you can follow along in the textbook and have the complete program, where in the textbook they kind of just show you little snippets of it. So it's much easier, I think, if you're looking at the whole thing. Where we were last time, we were looking at encapsulation by using methods. So we were just finally getting into our methods. We've spent a lot of time at the beginning of the semester looking at C# syntax because it can be really difficult for people to get used to. So you guys have had a chance to explore if statements and some looping statements, and you might feel like you need more practice. That's normal. Go out there and find it. Give yourself an assignment. You know, decide what you want to do. I had a student once who wanted to learn how to develop iPhone games, so he downloaded Xcode at that time and all of the things he needed for iPhone. And he just started working with Objective-C because he had a little bit of C# background. And he decided his first app would be a counter. One of the youth ministers at his church said, oh, I could really use something where I could just tap the phone and it would count, because I have to count people that come into church every night and the people that go into this meeting and the people that go into that meeting. And so Derek was like, I can do that. Nice, simple app. And so he learned how to make a button, and he learned how to access a variable and how to increment that variable, and then how to save it so that it would still be there next time when the guy opened the app back up, and he could say, oh, you left off at 41 or whatever. And so Derek ended up getting an internship at Apple and working at Cupertino for a few months and having a great time. So those little teeny programs can really make a big difference and can really help you. So anything that you think of like that, it's going to be good practice. Just try it. In our module this week, one of the things that's out there for practice is kind of some videos about creating an animal class. That's kind of a standard thing for a lot of programming languages. They'll say, oh, we're talking about class structure. So you can take a look at that if it's something that you'd like to have a little bit more practice with. The Quizlet this week is about classes. We're going to get started on that if you hadn't noticed. And so for this week, we do, again, have a really short RUPL. It's only like 5 assignments. You won't even know what to do. It's so quick. And then our application is going to be a phone store inventory. Like I said, we'll have 2 days of class, so yay. But last time, we were working on our methods. And we left off in our program kind of not quite done. So let's open that program back up and just look at that a little bit more about methods. So for mine was named Chapter 4 Method Practice. Let's make sure this looks just like yours. And where we left off at the end of us looking at this together, I asked you to create an input decimal method that would be just like the input int method, only process a decimal data. Because for our audio CD app here, we decided that the data we were going to keep for our audio CD was an ID number, the album name, how many tracks were on the CD, and the cost. And so we were trying to use some different data types there. So our input decimal method should be just like this. So take a look at it. A bunch of you went off and did some creative things and did some calculations and stuff, and I'm not exactly sure why, because we didn't want to do those kinds of things in this method. In this method, we just want to read in a decimal. So let's fix yours to be somewhat like this. All you have to do is copy the input int method and change it to enter a decimal, because we're going to do our calculations a little bit different than that. We're not going to do them here in this method in our main class. So let me give you a couple of seconds to get that updated and find your project. Yes, sir?
I was just wondering, you know when you click on like on a word in C#, it highlights all the other words. There's a similar thing in Notepad++. I was wondering if there's any way to, like, you could change all of them at once, like in Notepad++.
You can do the find and replace,
Oh, okay.
and the replace will change them all at once for you.
Thank you.
Are we changing the int method, or are we making it new?
It depends. If you already had it and you put some sort of calculation in it, you're changing it to be an input method. If you didn't create it at all, then you're just putting it in. So it kind of depends on what you did last time. So if you remember our input int method, we just asked for a parameter that would be the prompt we were going to display. Our input decimal is going to do the same kind of thing. I saw some great code over the weekend when I was grading. I saw on Ruffles and stuff, some people just made the whole prompt be a parameter. That's a great way to do it. They could reuse that same method for all of their different inputs, unless it's different data types.
Should numtracks be trained decimal too? Because that was a thing. Oh.
So in your cost should have been a decimal from the beginning. So let's get that all going. Now I can post this file to the chat. And then everybody can grab it in case you need it. Okay, so the chat on Zoom has the program.cs file that I'm working with. So if yours is getting a little too interesting and you would like to copy and paste this one, that's fine. Make sure I'm on the right project of ours, that mine matches yours. Sometimes I get so many versions of them. Should be right. So kind of review and look at it as we're going. Now, Visual Studio helps us a lot with the color coding. So sometimes, and especially with that Viaspora application added, it does a lot more color coding. So sometimes I don't really encourage you guys to print things out as much and use like highlighters to highlight important things. But do make sure that you do that if necessary. We don't need to because the IDE does it for us. So when we look at this method header, remember the header is like the declaration of the method. And right in the middle in C#, we see the name of the method. And with my color coding, it's in white. Now, before the name of the method, we start out with public or private, which we've left off of this method, so it would default to private. We can have modifiers like this keyword static. And we saw last time that every method we put in the same class as our main method has to be static. Then after that is our return data type. This method is going to return a variable that's a decimal data type and match those all up. And then after our method name, in parentheses, we have any parameters. Our parameters, when we declare the method, include the data type. But when we call the method, our parameters do not include their data type, which has already been declared by us declaring the method. So let's put a call in for this input decimal method. It should go into our main method. So in our main method, we should have a call to our display instructions, our input string to get our ID, our input string to get our album, our input int to get our number of tracks, and then we're going to add a call to input def to get our cost. So our return value there, that's a decimal, is going to be placed into our cost variable. Don't forget too that the PowerPoint tries to point out some of these different syntax things. And again, you can print them out and highlight and draw on things and make arrows and all that great stuff, whatever you need to do.
What did the last line say?
Oh, let me put it back out there for you, sorry. I was trying to find this. There we go.
Thank you.
Now I have one more line of code in there that I'm going to comment out because we're not ready to use it yet. But we should be able to run our program and display our information. That's why I don't think that I have the same exact thing as you guys. Actually, I can't display it. I don't have an output statement. So I'm going to use the debugger. I'm going to set a breakpoint right here where I call the input decimal method to get my cost. And that way I can make sure that all my data fields are set to the right values after I run. So let's run this thing. The first thing it asks me for is the CD ID. I'll put something in. We made it a string, but I'm kind of using it like it's a number, but I wanted to have that flexibility. And then let's see, what's the album that we want? Can't think of any albums this morning. You guys will have to let me think of one. I'm sure there were some great ones last night. How many tracks does it have? Let's say 12. Now, it didn't break. It looks like it did, but what it did is pop up to the debugger and show me this line of code where I set my breakpoint. Now, it hasn't executed this line of code yet, so if I look down here in my locals, I'll see that I have values for my ID, what I typed in, my album, my number of tracks, but my cost is still 0. So if I press F11 to tell the debugger to step into this line of code, it starts running my input decimal method. It's going to write out our prompt for our user and then do the read. Now I need to jump over here and type something in. What do I want my cost to be? 50. Now it didn't show up, but it's actually been input, hopefully. Press F11, and we'll see it 50. And it's going to return that value. And then now our cost should have that value. I got to press F11 one more time, and you'll see it show up there. Yes, sir?
Mine's not working.
What's it doing?
Does this?
So what's wrong?
I don't know. No.
You might have to click stop and run again, because once it's mad at you, you're going to have to run it.
Try to like stop it.
Push your square up on top, like your square stop icon, the orangey red one. That's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to click stop. Do you see it? Click stop.
I don't have it.
It's not running.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So,
Sorry.
no problem. All right, we were looking at this, amazingly beautiful PowerPoint here. There it is. What if we need to pass more than one parameter? Well, we're going to put commas between our parameter values within our parentheses. So when I declare a method, if I have multiple parameters, I'm going to do data type, parameter name, comma, data type, parameter name, comma. And keep going until I have all of my parameters taken care of. Then when I call that method in the same way, I'm going to do value, comma, value, whatever I want to pass in is those parameters. So we're going to practice that with our output method so that you guys have a good example in your code. We'll have a lot of parameters. But before we do that, one last topic in methods that we need to talk about is the overload. Right here in this program, if you can't tell, but each of these are a method. And I have method 1 here that returns an integer and has no parameters. And I have method 1 here that returns an integer and expects a parameter of an integer named num1. And I have method 1 here that returns a string and expects a parameter that's a string value. It is going to call it no. Can I have 3 methods named method 1 in my program? Yeah, I can. Right? I do. Right here. How can they be all the same name? Well, because the name isn't the only thing that matters. When we're looking at C#, it's the entire method signature that makes the method unique. So here, method 1 returns an integer and has no parameters. That's its signature. All of those things together. Here, method 1 returns an integer and has a parameter that's an integer. So that's its signature, right? See how it's different than this one? This one didn't have any parameters. This one does. Next, this method 1 is different also. It returns a string, so that makes it a different signature right away. And it also expects a string as a parameter. So whenever we're looking at C#, we can really, really do whatever we want because we can have the same method doing multiple things. Why would I want to do that? Well, what if you guys have a website somewhere and you let people type in information that they want to search for employees? Well, if you let them type in a number, you call your search method that searches for employees by employee ID, right? If they enter in text, you call your search for employees method that uses a string value, and then you know you're going to search through all the names. So we can have one method name that's defined multiple times, that does different things. And that's an overloaded method. We get a lot of practice with it, and we'll work with it a bunch. So it's not something that we have to have a total understanding of right off the bat. But just be thinking of it if we have an overloaded method. One that I think of right away is driving, right? I could drive, but how I drive is going to be different depending on the car, right? I'm still going to be driving. I'm going to be doing that same action, but I could be doing something different depending on the car. So if I have a car that's an automatic, I'm just going to put it in drive and just drive, right? If I have a car that's a standard, I'm going to put it in first, use the clutch and take off correctly, shift the way I need to, right? If I have some sort of giant semi, I'm going to do an even more elaborate procedure of getting the truck into a takeoff gear and ready to take off. So I'm still driving for each of those things, but I'm doing different actions depending on the vehicle. So depending on my input, I'm doing different things. And C# and object-oriented programming let us do that with method overloads and overloading. So that method signature is all of these things all put together. The return type, the method name, and its parameter list. So it's not just method name that matters. It's all of them. So if I'm looking at somebody else's program and I find the method they're running, I better make sure that's the only time that method is declared, because it could be in there again. All of these things are combined to make that unique signature to know which method to call. So we were looking at all of this information last time and today, and I called methods encapsulation. Again, the reason that a method is encapsulation, remember the pictures, stuff contained within something else, details hidden from others. When I have a method, I'm hiding those implementation details. Nobody needs to worry about what happens inside that method. It's like a black box. All they need to know is how to call it and how to get things back from it. So methods implement modular programs. Each method we create has a specific logical function and helps to make our code reusable, more understandable, and maintainable. How many lines of code should be in a method? Is there a rule? Not really a rule, but 5 to 10. If you start getting more than 5 or so, you should be looking at that method and thinking, is this really just performing one logical function?
Can you have a method do multiple things, like 2 while loops, or is it best to separate?
It depends on the logical flow of your program. So if you feel like these 2 while loops are both really important in processing this item,
They fit together.
they should fit together. Now, the while loop body should be a method for each one, because then that way, instead of having a bunch of stringy code inside that while loop body, that while loop is just going to call a method that does what needs to happen. And so we'll try to get more methods going. Yes, sir?
So would it be appropriate for methods to call other methods?
Uh-huh, definitely. And as a matter of fact, with our program here, we need to go ahead and make our main processing into a method, and then we could just call it repeatedly if we wanted to let them enter like another CD's information. So let's try to do that with ours, and then that way we can see how we can split it out into another method super easily. So I've seen in the past few years that sometimes as we're beginning programming, it can be really hard to jump into these methods and start using them. So we're really going to try hard to get comfortable with them, because it can really make your programs a lot more maintainable and easier to use and easier to fix and all those great things. So the first thing we said we needed to do was create an output method. We've created input methods to gather all of this great data for our CD, but now we want to output that method for the user. We might have a write statement or something that we put in for debugging. Now's our time to get rid of that. So let's create a new method. This method is going to be display output. Now this method is going to have several parameters. because in order to display our output properly, it needs to have all of our data passed to it. So we're going to have multiple parameters. The first one I picked was the username. So if you'll look, I just kind of put them in the same order as what we used them in our main method, but there is no rule or rhyme or reason, something that is logical to you. Usually we're going to see an ID at the beginning of a parameter list, you know, one of the first things we would think of, and then a name. So this is just kind of a logical order. I put our username first because that was outside of our audio CD information. And then we have a string for our ID number, a string for our album name, an integer for the number of tracks, and our decimal cost value. And we want to pass all of those into this method. Now notice when we create our parameter list, again, we're doing data type, variable name. This is the variable name that will be created inside this display output method while we're using it. We can use that variable. So that variable will only exist while this method is running. Each of our parameters are separated by a comma. After the comma is a good place to go to a new line if you need to. Some people will code with one parameter per line, with after a new line after each comma. Some won't. So make sure you're getting that put in so that you know what to do there. All right, so let's output this. I think for our output, let me move this out of the way here, get the right one. Too many projects open. For our output, we're going to try to make it kind of columnar. So let's use a string variable to hold all of our output so that we can make sure we have everything organized the way we like. Let's call our string variable message. This is where we're going to add our output. So I could put a comment on that, hold the output string. It's going to be our message. Now the first thing we want to add to our message variable, I'm going to use the plus equal. Remember that shortcut will add something to a variable, like a sum, but it'll also concatenate or add more to a string. So for our message string, let's add in, oh, and I want to use one of those interpolated strings. Let's put that comment in while I can remember that off a word. This is that interpolated, and that's the one that starts with the $sign and allows us to use variable names as our parameters. So for this message in our interpolated string, we're going to output audio CD space ID colon, and then I want a space, and we're going to put the ID that was assigned to this CD. Let's go to a new line after that. Now, because we're using a string variable here, we have to make sure that we do the new line commands ourselves, right? Because with our write line, we know C# would do it for us, but doing it this way, we have to make sure we get it. But we can use these interpolated strings to load up the big main string. Now I want my artist, and I'm going to line up my colons here to declare our artist variable. We'll just put its name inside of. Oops, I named it album. So that's okay. I can name my parameters anything I want. That's the variable name that'll be used within the method. Might be confusing to others, but we can name them whatever we want. Now after artist, we're going to have the name of the album or CD. So I'll put that name within my output. So it looks just like we're doing a bunch of right line statements. We're just putting everything into a string instead. Now our number of tracks.
Name doesn't seem to be correct.
You what?
Name isn't correct.
Oh, it's mad at me, huh? What did I name that?
I don't think we
Let's
have
see.
one.
Oh, am I missing it? Better put that in. Oh, I have too many, don't I? Let me fix that. I don't need that line. I'll just delete it. When I first did this at home, I was carrying an album and a name, and I decided we didn't need that many strings. So we'll just keep one of them. Now, beside our num tracks, the last thing that we need is our cost. I'm going to go ahead and end that with a new line. And then the last thing I'll do in this method is a write line command to write out our message. Now, if you get that in, run it and see if it's working. Do some debugging.
Seems to work.
Is it working? Yay. I'm going to run mine, make sure it's working. Now in my main, do I have a read key or something? Nope. Okay, so I want to make sure I call my display output method, passing it all its different parameters. And then I'm going to put in my read or read key to make it pause. Now there's weird things that programmers do like that. I don't want to put that read down in my display output because we know this read statement is something we have to mess with all the time. We have to take it out, put it in, depending on what we're working with. So we don't want it buried down there in some method. We want it to be up at the top in our main where we'll see it. So let's run this. You guys already have. I'll make my CD. 4 tracks, $60. And there's my information coming out. I think that my cost should be in currency display. So I want to go to my display output method. And let's add that :C to make that cost variable display with that currency format. Yes, sir?
So you should probably also change on the line where you call the album variable.
Uh-huh.
Actually say album name, because not after asking for an artist name, you're asking for
An album.
what the album is.
Can do that. See if it's looking good then. Seems like my album, my colon is over 1, 2, so I want to, that's from me just changing that, make sure it's all lined up. Yes, sir?
It asks for the album ID twice.
Look in your main. So in your main, if you're calling input string, each time you call it, you want to make sure you're passing the correct prompt. So the first time you call it, it should have the ID prompt. The second time you call it, it should say album.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, find it. It's all good debugging things, good things to find. Yes, sir? Do we are we doing anything that we would want to return? Do what? No, we don't have to return. So what about this method header tells C# that we're not going to return anything? That's a really important point. Void. So since we have that data type here, keyword of void, that's our way of saying we won't have a return value. So if we put a return statement down here, we would get an error message until we change that void. So you wouldn't have used to, but it's just so nice to you guys all the time, always giving you all these messages to let you know things. So we could have display output many, many times if we wanted to as an overloaded method. Let's try it. Oh, it's kind of a messy one to use. I think we'll try something a little different. Let's put this one to bed. If everybody's working, let's save it. Now, one thing about this one, let's put some comments up here at the top before we close it. Whenever assignments are submitted, your project assignments, one of the criteria on your rubric is comments. The rubric is actually designed to make people get some points even if they weren't successful with the program. So if you put comments in your program, you get 5 points. Guess what's going to start happening if you don't put comments in your program? You'll lose those 5, and that drops you down to a low B, right, for that project, just for comments. So let's not do that. So we always want to put comments in, and when we're coding, I can forget, just like you guys, because I'm busy trying to give you some sort of concept. But whenever we're turning in a project for points, we want to make sure we don't forget. So this one, I would just say my class name, I kind of left it as program. That's okay. My classes are going to be more meaningful here in just a minute. My date. My purpose here is going to be gather input about audio, CD, media. So remember, whenever we do those 3 slashes, we get the nice comments put in for us. So let's comment each of our methods, because we're going to copy from this source code a little bit as we go forward. So let's go to our main method. And right above our main method, or right there on it, we want 3 slashes. Yeah, see, that doesn't work. People are able to do some sort of magic keystroke. Help me figure it out if you get it. I open a new line and then type my 3 slashes, and it puts everything in there all pretty. So when I use the 3 slash comments like this in C#, it puts in automatically XML tags. So they look a lot like HTML tags, and they're tags that are used like that. They're going to be used to generate our comments for the IntelliSense editor, so that if somebody else was to use our code, they would see the comments that we leave. Notice it already puts the parameters in there for us. So that's why we kind of wait until we're done before we update our method comments, or we might need to come back and delete them and re-update them. So let's try something here. The main method starts the program. I'll go down to my display instructions, and this method displays user instructions. And of course, if we had anything tricky in this method, any sort of code that we thought was important to let somebody else know what was going on, we would document that here. Now, after my display instructions method is my input string method. So I'll put a comment for it. This method inputs a string variable. Should I say inputs and returns? Now in this one, whenever we created the XML comments, the generator was able to say, oh, this returns something. I see a return statement, but I don't know what it returns. So we can put some information in there if we like, and we could just say that it returns a string, or we could say that it returns the name of the variable. In this case, we don't really have a name of the variable, so we'll just say it returns a string. We can get as specific in these comments or as general as we like. Now our input int will do the same thing. This method inputs and returns a valid integer. Now our input decimal, this method inputs and returns a valid decimal. My returns, I'll put decimal. Yes, sir?
My 3 slashes stopped working. Like where I press 3 slashes. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Be right at the beginning of one. Now for our display output, this method displays the audio CD data fields. Now you notice how many parameters we got here generated for us with those 3 slashes. So it saves us a lot of time not having to do this ourselves. Yes, sir?
It's not working at the end of it again.
And what do you want?
After the display output. So put it before you display. Sorry.
Ask why it prints out all the parameters.
That's what it's
Is it
doing for you.
Is it required? Is it required to do that, like if we have an older version where it doesn't do that for us, or?
If you do this, then other people that are using your code are going to see these values in IntelliSense
Okay.
when they go to use your method.
Okay.
But if you don't do it, C# is going to try to figure something out.
Okay.
So it's just like other comments. They're helpful to others, but not something that would break your program. So now that we put that in, let's go up and add a new prompt, a new call to our display output. We're not going to use it. I'll just start typing in my main display output. Now, thank you, Bussy. As soon as you type the name of our method, notice it's going to our comments now to give the IntelliSense help. It says this method displays the audio CD data fields. That was my comment. So that's where it's pulling it from. And then it says now, when it's giving you all of the parameters, basically the parameters that we had in our list. If I type my first parenthesis, notice how it's got the username string bold in that IntelliSense help. It's saying right now, you need to type in a string that's the username. That's the first thing that this method wants. So if I put in a string, and type my comma. Now the IntelliSense shows the ID field is bold because that's the field that you're on now for this parameter list. Yeah, it's really helpful. So whenever you do those comments that way, the XML type comments, IntelliSense just tries to use your information to be helpful. So it gives you a chance to have input into the IntelliSense stuff. So let's save all that and close this one. And like I said, we might copy some code from it before we are done with it. But we wanted to start talking about object-oriented classes. Let me open this project here real quick to show you. Maybe. It's not the one I want. Let's try this one. That should be better, an old one. So C# is an object-oriented programming language. You hear that all the time, and you guys are working with lots of different programming languages. I know some of you are taking 3 or 4 different programming language classes this semester. It can be a lot. Most of them anymore are pretty object-oriented. So you get the idea of classes and objects being important in your program. This one is a Unity program. So it's not exactly perfect, but it gives you the concept of objects. So I want you to focus on these squares, these cubes that are being emitted here. Okay? Each of those cubes is an object, right? A cube object. Right now, they all kind of look about the same, but are there things, oh wait, are there things about this cube that could be different? Smashing what?
Dimensions.
Size.
Size?
Color.
I thought that's what you were saying. Color?
Direction.
Their
that
direction?
they're moving.
We could have like even a force or something like that behind one be different from some of the others, right? Because they have that capability since they're each their own object. Could we name each one of those something unique if we wanted to? If we wanted to, we could. So we could even have some name. Do what?
It's quite a lot of cubes though.
It's a lot of stuff to keep up with. So we might have trouble naming all of them, but we could if we wanted to.
Or you could name them in groups, maybe like some of the ones that are just moving in one direction.
Our sideways one versus our up and down. Yeah, we could because we just don't know. So we could even be keeping track of capabilities or aspects of the direction to decide other things, for sure. Now, what about all of this is data that has to do with our cube, right? This marker doesn't want to work. So this data is stuff that could be different for each of these cubes. Now, each of these cubes also have different actions or behaviors that they could use. So what kind of behaviors do we have for these cubes? Well, the first one is to come alive, right? To be instantiated. So I'm going to put that down, instantiated. It's a big word for today. What else?
Some of them pile up. Like they seems like down there at the bottom, some of them are piling up or falling down.
So what kind of action would that be?
Resting.
Resting? That's a good word for it. Because it's like they're sitting there, and as new ones get piled up, they can fall off and do other things too. What other kind of actions could they have?
Flying away.
Flying away? What if they fall off all the way completely? Are they gone?
Yeah, it looks like this.
We could say that we could destroy them. right? So we could bring them to life by instantiating them if we wanted to. We could destroy them if we wanted to. We could probably add all sorts of different actions. We could change the color, right? Because we would want to be able to do that on the fly. We could maybe change the speed. So any of those kinds of things that we said were data, we could have actions that were dependent upon our data, right? Or that updated our data. So we could have all of these different things going on. So our cube is an object, and this is object-oriented programming, right? Because the things that I have happen for my cube object, my code is always going to be the same, right? So I'm going to be running the same exact code no matter how many thousands of these objects are impacted by that code, right? Because this code can just create those objects and do things with them. And that's what we have going on in object-oriented programming. So it's what we need, right? So right now with our current audio CD implementation, we can prompt for the data fields for a CD and then display it. But what if they want another CD? Do we have the capability? We could ask them for more data, but we would lose that data they gave us the first time, right? Because we're not keeping track of multiple instances of these audio CDs. We just have one because we're running it in our main. And our main is static, which means there can only be one. So since our main is static, and that's what's controlling our application, we can't do this. We can't have a whole bunch of audio CDs in our store. Our application is limited. It can only do one. So we're going to fix it to where we can have multiples and have CD objects that we use and create so that we can maintain our inventory properly. So let me close down Poor Unity here before it crashes my computer. Let's see what we got. So object-oriented programming isn't really different programming. It's just the thoughts of all of your data and methods being associated with some sort of object. So let's try this one here. This one isn't on Canvas yet. I'll get it out there for you. Try this fancy new pointer thingy. Will you work? No. To try the on button. So you're supposed to have some sort of green pointer or something that you guys can see. Can you see it on there? Apparently the red ones wouldn't show up on this, but it won't go. Okay,
Give me a minute.
think so. Just have to figure that out. I'll get it. Okay, remember last time, encapsulation, stuff squished up inside other stuff so that we can't see it. We don't care how a phone works because we use the abstract outer layers that interface with us. We don't care what's encapsulated inside of that unless our battery's dying or something, right? But it's all encapsulated, safe from us, and making us not have to worry about it. So notice both of those sides of encapsulation. Not only does it make it where I can use my phone super easy without having to worry about it, it keeps those phone parts safe from me, right? Because I can't fiddle with circuitry and things inside my phone easily. I would have to work really hard. That's important. That keeps that phone working, right? If I could fiddle with it all the time, it probably wouldn't work as long. So encapsulation, not only does it hide the details from the user, it protects the details, right? Because we want all of those pieces of our phone to be safe and secure, even from us. We know how we destroy that outer part of our phone. Here was our little program. We had our main and all of our methods that we created. Before we go any further talking about classes, I have a question. I've seen a lot of people write a lot of programs, and one thing that I've seen a lot is some people don't like it this way. Some people like to do display instructions. Let's see, I'm going to have my display instructions call my input string method to get my strings, and then I think I'll have my input string method call my input int method to get my integers, and then I think I'll have it call my input decimal, and finally I'll have all my data So I'll call my display output. Is that a good way to code that thing?
No.
No. Why?
You need some kind of greeting for the display instructions, that way the user.
It would work. It'll work exactly the same, right?
You need to be organized.
It's just terrible organization, right? Because it works fine, but if I need to find something, right, I have to go digging around, buried. All of my calls are buried within these other methods. And so it's much better organization if we do all of our calls of our main processing functions from our main methods or up at the top like that. So we try to not get things buried. Much better organization. But when you're first beginning to program, there's not really as many reasons for you to be encouraged to do it this way. So just be aware that it's much better organization. And as you get old and wise and experienced, you'll be like, oh man, I'm glad I did it that way. So our audio CD. We created our inventory program. We can input our info about one CD. But what if we want to save information about more than one? We have more than one in the store. Well, if we want to, we could use a class structure then. And each of our class instance would be an instance of our CD. So here's a basic class. Whenever I'm looking at a class in any object-oriented programming language, I can think about a class as bringing together info about an object. So it brings together our data and our actions and behaviors. And it puts them all in one place for a CD. So here I have a class that's called audio CD, and all it does is calculate a value of the CD. Right now, remember, we have like the cost of our CD, but we don't have any sort of calculations or values or anything. So we could create a class that just calculated that value for us. That'd be fine. Why would we not want to put that just right there in our main that we already have? It might be that we could call this from lots of different places, that we could call our calc value method from our audio DVD department or some other area like that. Might just be better for us that we could create this class that has this call to do a calculation. So we can do that really easily. Let's try it with our program. We're going to jump around. Let's open Visual Studio. And let's create a new project. Now it's still going to be a console app. And for this one, this is going to be our Chapter 5 stuff. And we are going to have a few projects in this one. We didn't really in our Chapter 4 because we'll be continuing to use methods all the time and getting more practice. So let's name this one Chapter 5 Audio CD. In this very first one, solution name, let's name it Audio CD Basic. Okay, and then I'm going to click OK to create this project. Now I want to copy the information from our previous project. We have all those really nice methods and stuff already made, and we could just use them. So there's a lot of different ways that we could go about doing it. Let's bring up another instance of Visual Studio and just have them side by side. So my favorite way, I just like to right click on the Visual Studio icon and bring up Visual Studio again. And then of course I could do the Windows arrow key to get them side by side. We have so many sub windows and things in Visual Studio that it can be hard to look at, but you guys have got it. Now, in this new instance of Visual Studio, I'm going to open our Chapter 4 method practice project that we just finished with. And I'm going to go up to, I'm going to find our program.cs and Control A to select all, Control C to copy. Now, when I come to my new project, I don't want to paste this with any of this existing stuff. So I want to Control A again to select all before I do my Control V to paste. That way I won't have like 6 hours worth of curly brace issues to try and resolve. So it seems like the beginning word teacher instructions to say that to you guys, but it's really important because of all our curly braces and how they can get you so messed up. So Control A to select all before you paste. Now I'm going to close our Chapter 4 project because since I've copied that code, I don't need it anymore. Excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah. Now, if you have any red squigglies or anything, we need to resolve those. Let's run it and make sure everything's okay. What's the matter? Okay.
Your namespace needs to be changed.
Namespace.
Okay. Okay.
Now, my namespace is just giving me an error, but it's going to be a lot worse whenever I do something here in a minute. So I want to leave that so I can show you how much worse it's going to get. Tyler, do you want to take over or do you want me to just come look at it? Do you mind showing everybody? You don't mind? Because I think it's good for everybody to see. Okay, I've stopped sharing. You can share. Let's see what he's got. It always brings you up in full screen and it won't let me move it. Okay, can you guys see what he's got here? First of all, the very first message says there's no argument that corresponds to ID. So let's double click on that error message down there. Yep. And it says, oh, yep, just comment that out. Now, what's wrong with that word read?
Needs to be capital.
Capital? And what about that last one? Double click on it for us. Oh, it's album in our parameter list. And you could change it in either place. So, like I mentioned when I was talking and chattering here, I kind of changed my mind as I was doing it for our class. So it's not the perfect name. Looks good. That resolved those. Will it run now? Okay, go ahead and release that thing then. Looks good. He's got it. Okay. I'm going to share again. Now, our beautiful program. Well, we're going to add in a new class, and all our class is going to do is calculate the value. Now, our value is going to be kind of a bogus calculation. We're going to put it in for program testing. So we're going to take the cost, like times the number of tracks, and maybe divide by 10 or something like that, so that we can come up with this value number. So it's not going to be meaningful, but it's going to be good for program testing. So we say that it's going to be in its own class. So let's create a class. A class is going to be created in our project. So you know I use Solution Explorer a lot, and I'll click on the project name and right-click to add a new class. You see down at the very bottom. Now we can also do project add class or Shift-Alt-C. You can tell it's kind of a common thing. So it has a keystroke. Any of those ways are fine. If you notice, I like to do the ones that are visual so that students can see. So I'm going to add a class. Now it comes up saying very few choices here. We don't really need to make any choices other than the name of our class. Well, let's name our class Audio CD. That's what we're working with here. Martin, do you want to drive back there so I can come back and kind of make sure everybody's going okay? Do you want me to make you be the one in control here of the screen? Maybe not. Let's keep on task, okay? Now, looking at our audio CD class here, this is easy peasy. That's all we needed was this word class and then the name of the class. Yes, sir? How'd we get there? That's okay. Right-click on your project in Solution Explorer and choose Add Class. And then we just named it Audio CD. Yes, sir?
What's the difference between doing this and adding a new project CS file?
It's in the same project.
It is in the same project, but it's not really much different because if you notice, we were working with a class that C# just always named program. And sometimes we went in and renamed it. But yes, you've been working with classes all along. It's just that it was the one default class and it had our main method in it. And that was the only thing different about that class than any others was that it had our main method in it. But you're exactly right. We've been doing this almost exactly the same all along. So now a couple of things to look at. First of all, our namespace. My namespace here was generated automatically based on my project name, and it's Chapter 5 Audio CD. So I'm going to copy that because we saw that our namespace, whenever we copied from our previous project, was not correct. Now I can go to my program.cs and fix that. I'll paste it. Now your namespace name starts mattering when we start using these class files because now this CS file and this CS file are only related by that namespace name. So if they're not the same, we could have trouble with code being able to see the code in the other file. So we've got them named the same, everything is great. Now this new audio CD class that we're creating, it's only going to have one thing in it, one method. According to this beautiful UML diagram I just barely showed you, it's going to have a method named calc value. Now our calc value is going to calculate the CD's value. So let's create that method. First of all, we're in a separate class, so we have to make our method public. We're going to make this method static, and I'll tell you more about why here in a minute. And then we're going to make this method return a decimal value because it's going to be our value. We said our method was going to be called calc value. And for us to calculate our CD's value, we're going to need to know the number of tracks and at cost. Now, like we said, these are going to be a bogus calculation. It's just going to be for our program purposes. So we would have to wait for the accountants and all those statistical type people to give us the real calculation. So we'll do our own. Now, right now, I've got some errors. If you mouse over your method name, you should see that you're getting the red squiggly underline because it says you don't have a body. You must declare a body. It's like, where's your curly braces? Okay, I'll declare a body. Now, it's still mad at me. It says, oh, you don't return a value. That's true. So I haven't gotten that code in there yet. So I won't worry about that error message because I need to create this method. So let's say we're just going to return a value that is our cost of our CD times, I don't know, the number of tracks divided by 0.1. We'll just make up some formula. Oh man, it's giving me all sorts of errors and I'm just trying to do a little bit of basic math. So let's see what it's griping at. First it says, operator star or multiply cannot be applied to operands of type decimal and double. So it thinks my 0.1 here is double. So if I put an M on it, that should make it into a decimal. Is that all it took? Really? Seriously? Oh my God, could take you 4 hours at night. I know it could, I'm sorry. That's true, it can. So always remember to use these format modifiers. If your book doesn't have a specific page for them, search for them on MSDN. That N is the main one that we'll be using because it just is basically money, and money is formatted the same as decimal.
MSDN.
MSDN, the Microsoft documentation. So that's where all your good stuff is. Now, this class is done. This is our whole thing, is just this one method that returns a value. Oh, it says, I don't like your name. It doesn't like our D being uppercase. So let's fix that. I'll follow those suggestions. Now, I'm going to rename this class in my Solution Explorer, though. I'm just not going to just change it. If I rename, I need to be super careful in rename mode to not delete the .cs. Visual Studio is pretty good about putting that .cs on our files, but if we delete it, we can get things kind of messed up. I'll just rename it to have a lowercase d, say yes, and then that way we'll be following the recommendations for our class name. So a class name in C# is recommended to start with an uppercase letter. The class name should be descriptive of what it's defining, what kind of object it is. And it should use upper camel case, where it starts with an uppercase letter, and then every other word in the class name starts with an uppercase letter.
Camel case.
Camel case. Over. Now, let's look at our method. Why did I name it, why did I make it static? Well, when we were looking at those cubes shooting out, I told you each time a cube showed up, it was an instance of our cube. For this, we are not going to create an instance of an audio CD yet. We're just going to run this static method that's going to be in memory one time for any CD, and we're going to let other programmers just call it directly. We don't have to create an instance of this audio CD to use its methods. So let's go use its methods. In our program.cs file, let's first add a new variable. And we'll name it value. Oh, it doesn't like that, does it? I think it's okay, but I'm going to name it CD value. Now, after we've got our cost calculated here, let's figure out our CD value. Now we want to use our new audio CD class, and we want to use the calc value method. As soon as you type your audio CD class name, you should see it change to the aqua color because the editor realized this is a class that you have defined. It'll be treated just like a data type, but now it's your class. When you type the dot, the system automatically shows you the methods that you can use from that class, and the only one we have is calc value, so that'll work for us. Now in our calc value, notice that we need the number of tracks be passed as a parameter and the cost. Now we have to change 2 more places. In our display output method, let's add in this CD value as a parameter argument. Everything's going to be mad at us. It's like you got too many now. So I'll go update my display output method to include a new parameter for the CD value. And very last thing we'll do is add it to our output message. Some weird thing. So in our program, we had to change our main to get that data. And we had to change our display output to display that data. If I were a less concerned programmer, maybe a little bit lazy of a programmer, I could have just put it in the display output, right? Right there, I could have just said, oh, here's the value, call that class and display that value. So either way would have been valid. But we had already started this whole plan where we were setting up all our data in our main, getting all of our inputs, and then calling our output method to output everything. So we wanted to keep it kind of in that same routine, but either way would have been fine. Okay, do you have any errors? Is it all okay? Because we had to update in a few places. Let's run now and see if it works. So I'm going to put in my ID, my album name. I'll say there's 30 tracks and it costs $65. I'm just making stuff up. Woo, it's an expensive CD. That's like a real collector. But I'm getting something out on our value. So we've got it all working there. Now that's our first little class. We created a static method. It's out there in memory once. If it were sitting on some server somewhere, it would still just be in memory once. And every user that we're running our program would just access that same version of that class method. So we wouldn't have it loaded into memory 75 times if we had 75 users.
My CD value isn't showing, but it's not showing any error messages.
Oh, okay. Can you share your code for us?
Sure.
Let me undo here. Okay, it should let you.
What is that noise?
The classroom noise. Our weird grindy noise.
Yeah.
Okay, scroll over all the way. Let's see what she's got here. Okay, so there's our CD value, and you're passing it. And then let's look at your output. That all looks good. So let's look at your audio CD class. I don't see any problems. Do you guys see any problems?
Namespace.
Namespace?
Oh, did you name it?
That's name is
Gotcha.
Good thinking though. So let's set a breakpoint. Go back to your main and let's set a breakpoint right on the line of code where you call the audio CD class.
so line 33.
Yeah.
How do you
Over just a little bit further to the gray bar. There you go, right there. Perfect. Now let's run it. This will be good for everybody because we'll be able to see it call that class. Now it's waiting for us, so let's press F11. You might have to click back over on your code window. Okay, so it went into the class. Now mouse over. Well, actually down at the bottom, can you see her auto screen? Notice the values are coming across properly. So you press F11, it should do that multiplication for you. That looks good. F11 again. And now what are we getting back for our CD value? F11 one more time and it should change it. That looks right. Everything looks right. Keep going, keep going. You got it. It's there. Yay. Well, that was good debugging practice. We wanted to see it. Okay, let's stop that one. Well, that's our very first class. And we'll be looking at a lot more. It's not a lot of lab time, not as much as I wanted to give you. I started making some videos for some of the REPLs, but I might have started too early with some of the decision-making ones. As you guys are going through the ones making for the methods that are due tomorrow night, let me know. And if you have questions, please send an email. Because usually if you have a question, you're not the only person. And those are ones I'll focus on making just quick walkthrough videos for first. So if you're not having trouble with them, yay. But if you are, email me and let me know. Any questions before we break for lab? You don't want to show us?
Well,
You don't want to show. Okay, lab time. That's okay. We want lab time anyway. Got a new REPL this week and a bunch of other stuff. Let me know if you need help finding something to do. Oh, well, we'll try not to do all that.
Stop sharing this.
I thought I had some.
I get that like something.
So yeah, it's works in Microsoft Visual Studio, but it will not submit.
Okay. Some video surveys of that, but you're doing great.
Compiler.
Huh. Okay.
Assignment yesterday. It was yesterday. And the only thing that crashes is the three upper method, which is ridiculous.
No, good, I agree with you.
Should have been gone.
Yeah.
Then memorize
on the final page. More week. It doesn't look like that's right. No, I've been given that assignment before.
Honestly, of course, the longest thing is just getting that water, right?
Yes, and they're talking to.
That's, I had the every day.
What question are you studying or are you playing video?
I was gonna go back and do you know what? That's what I feel like I did straight a little one piece, a little bit. Even though you lose the one game, I got to do another game, right? Just do it. You don't want to get on the clock. And you have to like, I mean, at least I do, you have to like win as much as you can. Where you gotta make up with like what you want. Where that I don't know. That's what we end up doing. And sometimes you hear, that's what I see on the Twitch, see professional players playing chess. Like some saying,
Yeah, this is a compiler. Because I'm not even getting this here in Visual Studio. So I'm gonna have to ask her what to do about this. So we're getting these characters. Yeah, well, this is. I went to Visual Studio and put all the code in, and I checked for errors. And it's like no errors. But I go to Apple and you're right here.
Because it was a really dumb calculation that I put in there. Your data is
It works. REPL, something wrong with REPL. Something wrong with REPL because I started doing the class in REPL, and these are the errors that are getting thrown at me in REPL. But when I go to do this in Visual Studio, Control F5, there is not a single error that throws up.
Oh, nice. Let's see what it's
I looked up the C of the error. It's a compiler error. And it's done like an ID, it's a follow ID. Doesn't usually not like somebody said that.
actually hybrid doesn't like the
Except, yeah, that's the funny thing, but I tried running some of I tried running some of the other stuff, the others, and they're working fine in Visual Studio. That's not what it is. You got your dollar price, your money price, you got your conversion. Now every time you get this thing to work. See you.
So go ahead and use getters and setters that don't use the random expressions. So for the get, let's just change it real quick. Just so that equals
Okay. What would you like to do?
Click right there. One more. And then just
Opening code right like this.
say return.
Turn.
And then click the code as after.
Oh, after this. You're fine.
Center.
Do the same thing.
Put the center.
Right here. Okay. I got it. Oh, is it right here too? Code right square, right? Just value. Around the whole get. Okay, so from get here, so throw $3 on
No, kids.
the inside, shove in the right place. All right, here we go.
See if that goes right. Is it right past that one?
It's saying now a see it where you get or set accessory expected. Primary constructor body is not allowed. Expected symbol that's it's the same error as this one.
Let me bring that. Change one like that the other night, last night for
Okay.
I had the great assignment. Let me see if I can find it.
It's super close.
Don't throw it at me.
All this new syntax that all these things don't handle. Do, do, do.
Yeah, when I get time, when I'm not studying. Yeah, I only have 2 minutes. Dude, when I'm at that right now, I got like a note card with me in biology and trying to study that one line. Yes.
Let's see. They have all sorts. I think can you see it? I should have shared it with you.
I think
Hang on, I'll get up and rock over.
we're super close.
Yeah, because I was just trying to follow what you did in your example, in your reference, and figure this out.
It should have worked.
That's what I'm saying, it worked in Visual Studio, so I
That's, let's see. You would get my answer in my-
yeah, and I tried it on all of yours, like it's tried submitting it.
It's not letting us do it, huh?
With that same error thrown up every time.
It's just like, no, you can't use that short lambda expression thing.
If we can, if I can update it, well, it'll work for probably the rest of them. I just gotta add more code, so.
Let me see what I have in the answers. Is that the very last
The
one?
very first one,
Very first one.
yeah.
Huh, it looks like it's doing it the way you have it. I wonder if, like you said, if REPL's just,
I mean, I have to, I'll get up to work in Visual Studio and just submit them to you. That's,
yeah, it's just frustrating. Can you see those?
yeah, I can see it.
That looks just like what you
It
had,
looks
doesn't it?
exactly like what I have in here, and
Let me make sure this one is still working, that something hasn't happened to it.
sounds good.
Nope, it's doing the same thing as yours. So let me contact them
Got it.
and I'll send you an email.
Thanks.
Yeah, because there's something going on with
What I'll
them.
do then is I'll just keep working on them in Visual Studio.
Okay.
And then I'll.
Yeah, because you're making really good progress. I hate that those getters and setters have so many different syntax, but it won't work now, and it did work. So
Okay, got it. Thanks.
I'll be like, come on, you guys. We don't care.